The cabin had always been my favorite place in the world. Ever since I was a child, I spent every summer at Lake Evergreen with my grandfather. The property had been in our family for generations, passed down from father to son and eventually to me. The lakefront stretched nearly 300 feet, with a small natural beach on one side and a rocky outcropping on the other. Pine trees towered overhead, creating cool shade even on the hottest summer days. Our cabin was not fancy by modern standards. 2 bedrooms, a stone fireplace, and a screened porch facing the water. The dock extended 20 feet into the lake, with a small boat slip where grandfather kept his fishing boat. What made the property special was not its amenities, but its history and the memories created there over decades. I remember the smell of coffee and bacon every morning, the sound of grandfather teaching me to cast a fishing line off the dock, and the way the sunset painted the water orange and pink each evening. Those memories became even more precious when grandfather was diagnosed with congestive heart failure last year. His doctor gave him 6 months, maybe a year if he was lucky. I visited him at the hospital after his second heart attack. The strong man who had taught me to split firewood and build a proper campfire now looked frail against the white hospital sheets. "James," he said, his voice weaker than I had ever heard it, "I need you to come to the cabin next weekend. There are things we need to discuss before it is too late." The following Saturday, I drove the 3 hours to Lake Evergreen. Grandfather had been released from the hospital but was moving slowly, using a cane for the first time in his life. We sat on the porch watching the water as we had done hundreds of times before. He seemed distracted, looking occasionally toward the neighboring properties where new construction had begun the previous year. "Things are changing around the lake," he said, nodding toward a large house being built 2 properties over. "That new development keeps expanding. They have been trying to buy this place for years." I had noticed the changes. What had once been a quiet community of modest cabins was slowly transforming. Modern homes with perfect landscaping were replacing the rustic cabins. Signs had appeared at the community beach about residents only and HOA-approved activities. "I will not sell," grandfather continued. "This land means too much to our family. That is why I have decided to transfer the property to you now, while I am still here to see it." I was stunned by his offer. "Grandfather, I do not know what to say." "Say nothing, just listen." He stood slowly and gestured for me to follow him inside. In his bedroom, he unlocked an old chest at the foot of his bed. From inside, he removed a small lockbox I had never seen before. His hands trembled slightly as he turned the key. Inside was a document in a clear preservation sleeve. The paper was yellowed with age, the handwriting elegant but faded. "This," he said with reverence, "is the original land grant for this property. It dates back to 1825, signed by the territorial governor himself. Our ancestor, Thomas Miller, received this land as payment for surveying work when this area was still frontier." Carefully, he handed me the document. I held it gingerly, afraid the ancient paper might crumble in my hands. The boundaries were described using natural landmarks: the lake shore, a particular large boulder, an old oak tree that still stood at the corner of the property. "This document proves our claim predates any modern development or association," grandfather explained. "I have kept it safe all these years, and now that responsibility passes to you." His eyes met mine with intensity. "Promise me you will protect this land, James. Promise me you will never let them take it." I looked at the document, then at my grandfather's face. "I promise," I said. 3 months later, I stood beside a fresh grave on the hillside cemetery overlooking the lake. Grandfather had passed peacefully in his sleep, his heart finally giving out. As mourners dispersed, I remained, looking down at the cabin in the distance. My cabin now. I will protect it, I whispered to the wind. I swear. 6 months after the funeral, I made the decision to move permanently to the lake property. My job as a software developer allowed me to work remotely, and the thought of starting fresh in the place that held my happiest memories appealed to me. My apartment lease was ending, and the timing seemed perfect. Moving day arrived on a crisp spring morning. The lake was mirror smooth as I unloaded boxes from my SUV. Birds called from the pines, and the scent of fresh water filled the air. For the first time since grandfather died, I felt a sense of peace. The cabin needed work. The roof leaked in one corner, the kitchen belonged to another era, and the plumbing made alarming noises. But it was mine, and I approached each repair with care, determined to preserve the character of the place while making necessary updates. My mornings began with coffee on the dock, watching mist rise off the water. I set up my office in the smaller bedroom, facing the lake. My productive hours increased as the stress of city life melted away. This was living as it should be. The first few weeks passed in blissful isolation. I met a few neighbors who remembered my grandfather fondly. Most were long-time residents who valued the quiet community as much as I did. But there were changes too. New faces, new construction, and conversations that occasionally stopped when I approached. One afternoon, an older woman named Martha from 3 cabins down brought over a welcome basket with homemade bread and jam. We sat on the porch talking about the lake and how it had changed over the years. "Your grandfather was a good man," she said, pouring tea from a thermos she had brought. "He stood his ground when those HOA people started moving in. Not many of us old-timers left who remember what this place was before they came." I had noticed signs around the community beach. "Lakeview Estates property, members only. HOA rules strictly enforced." "The HOA does not extend to this part of the shoreline, does it?" I asked. Martha's face grew concerned. "They have been trying to extend their reach. Started with the new development on the North Shore, then kept adding properties. Those HOA people have big plans for this whole lake, especially the shoreline properties." She looked at me meaningfully. "Just be careful, dear. They play rough." I dismissed her warnings as the worries of an elderly woman resistant to change. The property was mine, legally transferred. I had paid the taxes and registered the deed. What could an HOA possibly do? 3 days later, I found the first letter in my mailbox. The envelope was cream-colored, expensive-looking, with Lakeview Estates Homeowners Association embossed in gold on the front. Inside was a formal letter stating that my property was now within the boundaries of the Lakeview Estates community and subject to all HOA regulations. A thick booklet of rules was enclosed, along with a bill for $750 in annual dues. I laughed out loud and tossed the letter in the trash. Clearly, someone had made a mistake. My property had never been part of any development or association. Grandfather had been clear about that. Later that week, I was marking trees along the property line for a landscaping project when a voice called out from behind me. "Those trees are protected under our community bylaws." I turned to find a woman in her 50s watching me. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, her casual clothes clearly expensive. She wore large sunglasses despite the cloudy day and carried a tablet in one hand. "Excuse me," I replied, unsure who she was or why she was commenting on my trees. She extended her hand with a practiced smile. "Victoria Preston, president of the Lakeview Estates Homeowners Association. I do not believe we have had the pleasure." I shook her hand briefly, noting her firm grip. "James Miller, This is my property. Yes, we are aware of the ownership change. That is partly why I wanted to introduce myself. Her smile never reached her eyes. Your grandfather was resistant to progress. We hope you will be more amenable to our community standards. My property is not part of your HOA, I stated firmly. Victoria's smile tightened. That is a common misconception with some of the older properties. Our boundaries were expanded last year by county approval. She glanced at the cabin with barely concealed distaste. This rustic aesthetic was grandfathered in temporarily, but any new owner must bring the property up to our standards. I received your letter. I am not interested. It is not optional, Mr. Miller. Her voice cooled. But we can discuss this another time. I am sure once you see how property values increase under our management, you will understand. Everything will look much more uniform soon. She walked away before I could respond, leaving me staring after her, a growing sense of unease in my stomach. The next morning I found glossy brochures tucked into my door frame, pamphlets showing perfect homes with perfect lawns around a perfect lake. On the cover, in bold letters, Lakeview Estates, where community means conformity. This was no mistake. This was intentional. The second letter arrived exactly 1 week after the first. This time there was nothing friendly about it. 3 pages of alleged violations, each with a corresponding fine. Untrimmed bushes, $250. Nonconforming dock structure, $500. Unapproved exterior paint color, $750. Unauthorized boat storage, $350. Improper mailbox design, $200. The total came to $2,050, with a 30-day deadline for both payment and corrections. The letter was signed by Victoria Preston, with a copy to the Lakeview W. Estates Legal Department. My hands shook with anger as I read through the list. Some of the violations were absurd. The cabin had been the same color for 40 years. The dock was built by my grandfather's father. The mailbox had stood at the end of the driveway since Postal Service began delivering to the lake. That night I could not sleep. Instead, I sat in grandfather's old study, staring at the property deed. Something was very wrong. The deed clearly stated the property was private, not part of any development or association. How could they possibly claim jurisdiction? The next morning, I drove to the county record's office. The clerk, a bored-looking young man, barely looked up from his computer as I explained my situation. "Property disputes are common," he said, typing my address into the system. "Let me pull up the records." He frowned at his screen. "That is strange. There is a flag on your property file." He typed some more. "Looks like there is a pending jurisdiction claim from Lakeview Estates, filed 3 months ago." 3 months ago. That was before I even moved in, I said. Says here they are petitioning to absorb several unincorporated properties into their development zone based on community cohesion and infrastructure needs. He turned the monitor so I could see. There was a map showing the original development boundaries in blue and a proposed extension in red. My property, along with 6 others along the shoreline, was highlighted. "Can they do that legally without owner consent?" I asked. "Above my pay grade," the clerk said. Then, looking around to make sure no one was listening, he added, "But you might want to check these files too." He slid a folder across the desk. "Previous petitions they have filed seems to be a pattern." I spent hours reviewing the documents. The HOA had been systematically expanding its territory for years, using a combination of legal maneuvers, county connections, and pressure tactics. Most concerning was how many individual homeowners had eventually sold their properties after prolonged disputes. As I was leaving, an elderly man approached me in the parking lot. "I could not help overhearing you in there," he said. "You are James Miller's grandson, right? I am Harold Winters. I was friends with your grandfather." "Yes, that is right," I replied somewhat cautiously. "I live 2 properties down from you, the blue cabin with the stone chimney. I'm also a retired property attorney." He handed me a business card, yellowed with age. "Your grandfather helped me with a tree removal years ago. I never got to repay him. Perhaps I can help you instead." That afternoon, Harold sat at my kitchen table reviewing the documents I had collected. "Classic overreach," he said. "They have no legal right to claim your property, but they have been successful with this tactic before. Wear people down, make them think resistance is futile, then either force compliance or buy them out when they are exhausted." "So what do?" I asked. "Document everything. Record every interaction. Research the property history thoroughly, and be prepared for escalation. These people do not like to lose." As if on cue, voices outside caught our attention. Through the window, I saw 3 people walking along my shoreline, pointing and taking pictures. I recognized Victoria immediately. With her were 2 men in polo shirts with the Lakeview Estates logo. Harold and I stepped outside. "Excuse me," I called out. "You are trespassing on private property." Victoria turned, not at all surprised to see me. "Mr. Miller, we are conducting a shoreline assessment as required by our bylaws." "My property is not subject to your bylaws," I stated firmly. "Please leave immediately." One of the men, tall with salt and pepper hair, stepped forward. "I am Robert Chambers, head of the Architecture Committee. We have concerns about your non-compliant dock structure and boat storage." "My concerns are about your trespassing," I replied. "Please leave now or I will call the sheriff." Victoria smiled thinly. "That will not be necessary, we were just finishing up." As they turned to leave, she added, "Compliance is inevitable, Mr. Miller. Fighting only makes the process more unpleasant." After they left, Harold shook his head. "They are getting bolder. When your grandfather was alive, they would never have dared step foot on the property." That evening, after Harold left, I walked the property line as the sun set. Near the road, something caught my eye: bright orange surveying stakes driven into the ground, forming a line that cut nearly 20 feet into what had always been our land. The stakes bore the Lakeview Estates logo. The silent declaration of war was unmistakable. The harassment escalated quickly. Every day brought a new violation notice, each more ridiculous than the last. Excessive wildlife feeding because birds visited my feeder. Improper recreational equipment. Storage for my kayak on its rack. Unauthorized gathering when I had 2 friends over for dinner. The fines accumulated: $250, $500, $750 at a time. After 2 weeks, they claimed I owed over $5,000. Each notice came with the same warning: failure to comply may result in legal action and property liens. I installed security cameras after finding HOA representatives on my property multiple times. They never entered the cabin but took photographs, measured distances from the property line, and left more notices. When confronted, they claimed they were conducting routine compliance inspections. My neighbors grew distant. Martha still waved when she saw me but no longer stopped to chat. Others averted their eyes when I passed. Only Harold remained friendly, though he advised caution. "They are isolating you," he explained. "It is a common tactic, make you feel alone like you are the problem. Then when they force you out, no one protests." Social media posts appeared in the community group about my eyesore property. bringing down neighborhood values. Anonymous complaints were filed with the county about environmental concerns regarding my dock. A petition circulated calling for action against non-compliant shoreline properties threatening the lake ecosystem. None mentioned me by name, but everyone knew the target. One evening, a notice appeared on the community bulletin board announcing an emergency HOA meeting to discuss shoreline compliance issues. Though not a member, I decided to attend. I needed to understand what I was facing. The community center was packed when I arrived. Conversation stopped as I entered, and all eyes turned to me. Victoria, standing at the podium, smiled that same cold smile. "Mr. Miller, how nice of you to join us. We are just about to discuss the Shoreline Preservation Initiative." I took a seat in the back row. For the next 30 minutes, I watched a masterful performance. Victoria presented a slideshow about protecting our lake investment and ensuring community standards. Then came photographs of my property, with red circles highlighting supposed violations. "As you can see," she continued, "certain properties present challenges to our community vision. The board has been patient, but the time for action has come." When she finished, there was applause. I raised my hand, intending to speak, but Victoria quickly said, "We must move on to the vote. All in favor of proceeding with enforcement actions against non-compliant properties, please raise your hands." A forest of hands went up. When I tried to speak, a board member said, "This is a members-only vote, sir. You are here as an observer only." As people filed out after the meeting, I overheard snippets of conversation. "I never fit in with the community." Just like his stubborn grandfather. Bringing down property values. 3 days later, a courier delivered a thick envelope to my door. Inside was a cease and desist letter from the law firm of Chambers, Whittaker, and Associates, demanding I bring my property into compliance within 14 days or face legal action. I called Harold immediately. "They are stepping up their game," he said after reviewing the letter. "Robert Chambers, the architecture committee head, his law firm is representing the HOA. That is a conflict of interest if I ever saw one." "What do they hope to gain?" I asked. "Even if they force me to comply with their rules, they do not own my property." Harold's voice was grave. "I think you should visit the county administration building again. Look into any recent development applications for the lake area." The next day, I did just that. A different clerk was on duty, a middle-aged woman named Susan who remembered my grandfather. "Let me check the recent filings for you," she said kindly. After several minutes of searching, her expression changed. "Oh, you need to see this." She turned her monitor to show me a development application filed 1 month earlier. The plans showed a large-scale luxury lakefront development, with condominiums, a marina, and a clubhouse, right where my property and the neighboring cabin stood. "This cannot be legal," I said. "They do not own this land." Susan lowered her voice. "The application claims all properties are under purchase agreement or control of the development company, Lakeview Partners, LLC. She pointed to the signature page. "Look who the managing partner is." There in black and white was Victoria Preston's signature. That night, rain lashed against the cabin windows as I sat surrounded by bills, legal notices, and property documents. The cost of fighting a legal battle against a well-funded HOA with apparent county connections seemed insurmountable. My savings would be depleted within months. Through contacts Harold had made, I learned that other holdouts against the HOA had eventually sold under pressure. An elderly couple 2 miles down the shore had fought for a year before giving up. Their cabin was demolished the day after closing. I also discovered that Victoria Preston was not just the HOA president. She was a silent partner in the development company. The lakefront project would make her millions if completed. As lightning flashed across the lake, I felt defeat creeping in. Maybe selling was the only sensible option. I could take whatever they offered and start fresh somewhere else. My gaze drifted to the mantel, where a photo of my grandfather stood. His weathered face seemed to look directly at me, disappointing. 4 generations had fished from that dock, swam in those waters, and watched sunsets from that porch. The thought of luxury condos replacing our family legacy made my stomach turn. I picked up the photo, remembering grandfather's words, "Promise me you will protect this land." Something stirred inside me, not just anger but determination. There had to be a way to fight back. That night, lying awake listening to the rain, I suddenly remembered something crucial: the handwritten land grant grandfather had shown me. In the chaos of the past months, I had completely forgotten about it. The document was stored in a safety deposit box at First National Bank in town, where I had placed it after grandfather's funeral. Early the next morning, I drove to the bank. The manager escorted me to the vault, where I inserted my key into the box. Inside was the preservation sleeve containing the yellow document, just as grandfather had left it. Back home, I spread the land grant carefully on the kitchen table. The elegant handwriting described the property boundaries with reference to natural landmarks: the great pine at the north corner, the large smooth boulder at the water's edge, and the creek that flows into the lake from the west. These landmarks still existed, unchanged by time. Most importantly, the document bore the signature and seal of the territorial governor, dated 1825. This was the original claim to the land, predating any modern development, county reorganization, or homeowners association by nearly 2 centuries. Harold examined the document with growing excitement. "This could change everything," he said, "but we need to establish its authenticity beyond doubt. I know someone who can help." The next day, we drove to the State University 2 hours away. Professor Eleanor Williams, a historian specializing in 19th century land grants, met us in her cluttered office. She donned white cotton gloves before carefully examining the document. "The paper composition is consistent with the period," she noted. "The ink shows appropriate aging patterns. The territorial seal impression matches authenticated examples from the 1820s. She looked up, eyes bright with professional interest. "Where did you get this?" I explained my grandfather's preservation of the family document. Professor Williams nodded. Land grants of this era carry significant legal weight. When territories became states, these original claims were honored. If this is authentic, and all indications suggest it is, it would supersede modern zoning in many respects. She provided a formal letter attesting to the document's likely authenticity, recommending further forensic analysis for legal purposes. Armed with this initial validation, Harold arranged a meeting with Samantha Torres, an attorney specializing in land rights. Her office was in the city, a modern glass building that contrasted sharply with the historical document we carried. "This is fascinating," she said after examining both the land grant and the HOA's legal notices. "What we have here is a conflict between original territorial rights and modern zoning attempts." She explained that the original land grant created certain property rights that could not be simply overridden by an HOA or even modern county zoning, especially if the property had remained in continuous family ownership. "The HOA is counting on intimidation and the cost of legal battles to force compliance," she continued. "They never expected you to have documentation like this. This changes the entire legal landscape." For the next several hours, we developed a strategy. First, we needed official authentication of the document. Then, formal legal notices establishing the primacy of the original land grant. Finally, filing countering paperwork with the county to invalidate the HOA's jurisdiction claims. "It will not be easy," Samantha warned. "They have resources and connections, but they are overreaching, and this document gives us leverage they never anticipated." Over the next 2 weeks, I emptied my savings account to pay for professional forensic document authentication. Experts verified the paper's age, ink composition, and the authenticity of the territorial seal. Each test confirmed what we already believed. This was an original, legitimate land grant from 1825. With the authenticated document in hand, Samantha prepared formal legal documentation establishing the original boundaries as described in the grant. We matched the natural landmarks mentioned in the document to their modern locations, creating a survey that showed the HOA's boundary stakes were clearly encroaching on land that had been in my family for generations. On a bright Tuesday morning, I walked into the county clerk's office with a thick folder of documentation. The same clerk who had shown me the development plans, Susan, greeted me with a curious expression. "I would like to file a formal challenge to the Lakeview Estates boundary claims," I stated, placing the folder on her desk. "Based on original territorial documentation." She opened the folder, her eyes widening as she saw the authenticated land grant and supporting legal documentation. "This will need to be reviewed by the county assessor and legal department," she said, "but I will make sure it gets filed immediately." As I left the building, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. For the first time in months, I walked with confidence. The handwritten land grant, the document grandfather had safeguarded all those years, was now my shield against the HOA's attack. The battle was far from over, but finally I had a weapon. With the county filing complete, Samantha advised our next step, a formal response to the HOA's cease and desist letter. She prepared a certified letter with copies of the authenticated land grant and a professionally worded statement asserting my property rights based on the original territorial grant. "This property has been in continuous family ownership since 1825, the letter stated. "The original land grant, authenticated by multiple experts, clearly establishes boundaries that cannot be superseded by recent HOA jurisdiction claims. All notices of violation and fines are hereby disputed as invalid." We sent the letter to the HOA board and their attorneys, with copies to the county commissioner's office and the state property rights division. The certified mail receipts came back signed by Victoria Preston herself. The response was immediate. Security footage from my property showed Victoria arriving at the HOA office, opening our letter, and immediately making multiple phone calls, her face flushed with anger. Within hours, an emergency board meeting was called. Through the community center windows, residents could see animated discussions that occasionally escalated to shouting. 3 days of silence followed. No new violation notices appeared in my mailbox. The HOA representatives who had regularly photographed my property were nowhere to be seen. The quiet was more unnerving than the harassment had been. Then came the confrontation I had been expecting. I was at Miller's Market, the local grocery store in town, selecting produce when I heard Victoria's voice behind me. "Mr. Miller, how convenient to run into you." I turned to find Victoria standing with 3 board members, effectively blocking the aisle. Robert Chambers was among them, his lawyer's briefcase incongruous among the fruits and vegetables. "Ms. Preston," I acknowledged calmly, "did you receive my letter?" "That document of yours is an interesting historical curiosity," she said, her voice carrying so other shoppers could hear. "But it changes nothing legally. This community has standards that must be maintained." I had prepared for this moment. Taking a deep breath, I responded clearly, my voice steady. "That historical document establishes property rights that predate any modern jurisdiction claims. My family has owned this land continuously since 1825. No homeowners association formed in 2010 can claim authority over territory granted by the territorial governor." Victoria's smile tightened. "You are mistaken about the legal weight of ancient papers. Our attorneys assure us that modern zoning and community regulations supersede historical claims." "Is that why you have been trying to absorb unincorporated properties through questionable means?" I asked. "Is that why you filed development plans claiming control of land you do not own? Or why you have a financial interest in the development company planning to build on my property?" Her face flushed. Other shoppers had stopped to listen. An elderly man nodded approvingly at my words. "Your grandfather was equally stubborn," Victoria snapped, dropping her pleasant facade. "He rejected progress just as you are doing." "My grandfather protected our family legacy," I replied. "And now I am doing the same. Your tactics of intimidation, false claims, and harassment end now." Robert Chambers stepped forward. "This conversation is inappropriate for a public venue. We should discuss this through proper legal channels." "I agree," I said. "All future communications should go through my attorney. I have documented every trespass, every false claim, and every harassment attempt. I am prepared to defend my property rights fully." As I walked away, I could feel the stares of other shoppers. But unlike the HOA meeting, these looks were not accusatory. They were thoughtful, even supportive. The next morning, my phone rang. It was Robert Chambers himself, his tone notably different from the day before. "Mr. Miller, I am calling regarding the historical documentation you provided. Our legal team would like to discuss this matter further. Perhaps we could arrange a meeting." I directed him to contact Samantha, as I had stated at the grocery store. Within hours, she called to report the conversation. "They are rattled," she said with satisfaction. "The document authentication has them worried. They are requesting a meeting at a neutral location to discuss resolution options." Over the next week, something unexpected happened. Other homeowners began to reach out. First Martha, then others who had kept their distance. They shared stories of their own battles with the HOA, excessive fines, arbitrary rule changes, pressure to sell to approved buyers who often had connections to the same development company. 1 week later, Samantha and I met Victoria, Robert, and their attorney at a conference room in the city library. On the table between us, they placed a document and a certified check. "Lakeview Estates is prepared to offer you 3 times the market value for your property," their attorney stated. "This is a generous offer that resolves all outstanding issues." The check was made out for $1.2 million, far more than the property was worth by any standard measure. It was a stunning amount that would solve all my financial concerns at once. I stared at the check, feeling the weight of the decision before me. The check sat on the conference table, its amount more money than I had ever seen in one place. For a moment, I allowed myself to imagine what that money could do: financial security, a new start somewhere else, freedom from this ongoing battle. Then I reached into my briefcase and removed a framed photograph of my grandfather standing proudly on the dock, the lake stretching out behind him. "This land was never about money," I said, pushing the check back across the table. "My great-great-grandfather built that cabin with his own hands. 4 generations of my family have lived there. You cannot put a price on that history." Victoria's polished veneer cracked slightly. "Sentimentality is expensive, Mr. Miller. This offer is more than generous." "The offer is irrelevant because the property is not for sale," I replied. "Not at any price." The following week, Samantha filed comprehensive legal documentation with the county and state authorities. The authenticated land grant established the original boundaries. Historical property tax records showed continuous family ownership. Expert testimony confirmed the validity of the territorial grant and its legal primacy over modern HOA jurisdiction claims. The formal notice invalidated all HOA fines, rejected their authority over my property, and demanded removal of all surveying stakes and boundary markers placed on my land. It also required a formal retraction of their claims to my property. The impact extended beyond my own situation. Other homeowners, emboldened by my stand, began questioning their own relationships with the HOA. People requested copies of their property documents, reviewed the bylaws they had signed, and calculated the fines they had paid over the years. Harold organized an informal gathering at his cabin where homeowners shared their experiences. Stories emerged of selective enforcement, arbitrary rule changes, and pressure tactics. Many had simply complied, believing they had no choice. 2 months after our confrontation at the grocery store, a community town hall meeting was organized at the local fire station. The room was packed with both HOA members and independent homeowners. County commissioners attended, along with representatives from the State Property Rights Division. I presented my documentation methodically, explaining the pattern of HOA expansion and the tactics used. Other homeowners stood to share similar experiences: boundary disputes, questionable fines, pressure to sell to specific buyers. Officials took detailed notes as public records were presented showing the relationship between the HOA leadership and the development company. Maps revealed how properties acquired through HOA pressure tactics had been incorporated into development plans filed before the sales were even completed. The county commissioner, a woman who had been silent throughout the presentation, finally spoke. "Based on the evidence presented, I am requesting a formal investigation into the expansion practices of the Lakeview Estates HOA and its relationship with Lakeview Partners Development." 1 week later, local news reported that the county had opened an investigation into potential conflicts of interest and improper property acquisition practices. Victoria Preston's name featured prominently in the coverage. The investigation uncovered financial records showing that Victoria and 2 other board members had ownership stakes in the development company. Board minutes revealed discussions about targeting specific properties, including mine, long before any official actions were taken. 3 days after the investigation was announced, Victoria Preston resigned as HOA president. Her letter, read at an emergency board meeting, cited personal reasons and made no acknowledgement of wrongdoing. She put her lakefront home on the market the same day.